Hey everybody, welcome to episode 79 of the Is That Normal podcast. And today we're going to talk about boundaries.
Yes. So, Randall, have you ever had someone cross a boundary in your life?
Yes, on multiple occasions.
Maybe I should ask, has that happened today?
Yes, I've had both physical boundaries, but emotional boundaries have been crossed,
Yes.
and sometimes even with family members, and definitely in situations in my past where those boundaries have definitely been crossed.
Yes. And like you said, there's different kinds of boundaries, aren't there?
Yeah.
So there's physical boundaries, like literally, like there's fences.
Yes.
Like I had one day where I pulled in my house and I saw the police at my neighbor's house. And my neighbor comes running across his yard saying, "Hey, are these your pigs?" And my pigs had gotten out of his yard. And so me and him and the police officer chased and tackled pigs and hauled them across my fence line. So that's a boundary that got crossed.
That should be on YouTube somewhere.
It should have been. And there's also physical boundaries of just like personal space. We have a mutual friend who's been on the podcast with us,
Yes.
Kyle Schwenke. He has no physical space bubble.
I've
at all.
actually said Kyle doesn't. Not only does Kyle not have one, he has a negative physical space bubble.
He's more comfortable in other people's skin.
Yes.
Yes. But then, like you said, there's relational boundaries. And, a lot of times those may be harder to see but hurt more when they get crossed because we don't know why we feel bad. And we've probably all had the experience of someone in our life who doesn't get the cues of the emotional, relational stop signs that we put up, and they just crash through those things, and there's a collision with them in our life, and it's not pretty. And but that's a part of boundaries too. And then there's even just our own personal inner boundaries we set for ourselves about our emotions, our thought life, our spiritual life. What voices we allow to influence what we think and believe. And I'm watching that more and more. I think with everybody, young people that we work with, that they're letting so many unvetted voices speak into their life that they get spiritually confused because they haven't set a boundary of only listening to things they know and can trust is true. So
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're going to talk about those boundaries and hopefully help parents with being able to set some of their own boundaries, and then also help their children set healthier boundaries as well.
Well, like we said, welcome to the Is That Normal podcast. We're really glad that you join us and listen. We pray that what we do and talk about are topics and resources that are helpful for parents and families and concerned adults as we try to lead the next generation towards following Christ and devoting their life to Him. And that's multifaceted. There's so many different things that we have to think about. In my own house, we just like to have a lot of open discussion because we need to talk about spiritual things and emotional things and physical things and schedule things and educational things. But really those all fall under the umbrella of we need to look all of those under what does it look like to do these in the way Christ would have us to do. So we hope that this is a resource and a help. And for today, our topic of boundaries, I really want to talk about this because this just comes up over and over again. For me, for people I'm talking with in my house, for people I'm talking to in our church, that we have a hard time setting healthy boundaries for ourselves and others.
Yeah, absolutely. So help us with what that means exactly when we talk about setting those healthy boundaries.
Right.
Easy for me to say.
Yeah, so to overly simplify things, but I think maybe a place to start in the discussion is that boundaries basically come down to learning what you're going to say yes to and what you're going to say no to, and sticking with that. That's going to be a part of how to set boundaries and what boundaries are and aren't in our life, or whether we're holding to our boundaries. And so, Randall, what are some things you've said no to this week? Do you have anything?
Well, one thing that comes to mind, and actually, it probably took me longer than it should, was. We've both talked about when it comes to personality, we share the fact that we're both kind of people pleasers.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things this week is I took on trying to help someone with something technology related, and went way past the point of knowing I was not going to be able to solve that issue. but that part of me of not being able to kind of set that boundary and say, I'm investing time, a significant amount of time in this, knowing that I'm not going to get there just because, I don't want to let anybody down. And so there came a point where I finally had to take that step back and go, okay, I'm going to have to just say, I can't do this. This isn't working. And even when we talk about, I'm talking a little bit about time, but just the investment of things, you and I both, last week had a moment where it was like, oh my goodness, our schedules are crazy. And, we postponed this podcast for a week because we both realized we didn't have the margin without cutting into things that were very, very significant in our lives. And so we just had to make that hard decision.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And, and it is, like you say, it's hard for me because I've learned that I, in my whole relationship with boundaries, I tend to say yes to things I shouldn't say yes to, or say yes too many times.
Yes.
That tends to be something I struggle with. And in my, educating myself about boundaries and some of the research we'll talk about here in a minute, I found that really helped me understanding why I'm motivated to do that is because it tends to be that I think I'm going to lose my goodness. Yeah. I want to help people. I want to be a good person. I want to be pleasing to the Lord. I want to be selfless. I mean, all those things that we think, we're supposed to be, so much so that I will overextend myself because I don't want myself or someone else to think I'm not being good.
Yeah.
But it's not good to overextend ourselves. It's not good to get in where we can't fulfill our commitments. And so it's a real challenge. And so today I want to kind of talk about maybe how to start figuring some of that out.
Yeah, so let's dig into some of the specifics, and when we talk about boundaries, maybe define that for us and tell us what you mean by boundaries.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to recommend a super helpful resource, and a lot of what I'm going to share comes from this. It's actually a set of books and research, but like the foundational book is just called Boundaries, and it's written by a couple of guys, Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. They are Christians, and they come from a very Christian perspective in what they write. But it's also a research-based, exhaustive work on boundaries, what they mean, what they do to our emotions and our psychology, and it's just a really good book. And so if you really are struggling with boundaries, you have people in your life that are struggling with boundaries, it's a book I've bought many times and handed to people and said, you probably need to read this. Mm-hmm. And so I'd really recommend you guys checking it out. But as far as a definition of a boundary is a clear understanding. Really, a boundary is just a clear understanding of who I am, what I own, and what my responsibilities are in the relationship to my surroundings, people, and the things that I'm responsible for. And we often get in trouble, particularly with our children, when we try to own the things that someone else should own. Mm-hmm. And so when I start owning something that's not my own, I've crossed a boundary. I've crossed a boundary for myself, and I've crossed a boundary for those other people. And what happens is our identity gets wrapped up in the success of things that aren't even something that I'm responsible for. And it just gets to be a really dangerous place. And so we can allow others then to use us as an excuse or a crutch why they're not being successful. Just thinking about our children for a minute, that's as my older ones have coming into adulthood, this is a struggle. You think it would be easy to just clear cut. Okay, you're an adult now, you're responsible for this, but it's not. It's something I've had to make conscious decisions about. My kids have, because I'll tend to want to over function for them, which then makes them resentful to me, but also enables them to not do the thing they're supposed to do. And so all of those type of issues, if you've ever experienced those are boundary issues. I've said yes to something I shouldn't say yes to.
Yeah, absolutely. And those scenarios apply, whether you're talking about your relationship with your children, other family members, relationship with just the people around us, work. Really, that those types of boundaries are, we have to evaluate and set those in every aspect of our life. So, when we talk about boundaries, that sounds simple, but it can be really difficult to do that. So So, one of the things I found really helpful, and part of this is going to come into a little bit of that personality, because different people, different personalities, different experiences are going to lead us to approach boundaries in different ways. And so one of the things that Cloud and Townsend did in their book is just kind of lay out, like,
here's some different ways, and we may see ourselves in multiple ones of these, but these are different ways or types of boundary breakers that we have in the world. And one is people who are just compliance, is what they call them. So a compliant is someone who is going to tend to say yes to something they shouldn't, yes to the bad, I guess is the way they would say it. It's, and again, it's that fear of losing your goodness. And so they would get to a place where they're going to always say yes because they're afraid of what the relational consequence is going to be, but not seeing what the personal consequence is going to be. And then then another type of boundary breaker is the avoidant, and those are the people who are going to say no to things that are good. That they've been hurt or they're afraid or whatever, and they're going to wall themselves off from anything they think that could infringe upon them or make them feel bad again. And so they're going to say no, even the things that are good. Even when we start offering healthy things, we start saying, hey, maybe you should come out of your room and spend some time with other humans and breathe some fresh air. Nope, I'm good. Maybe you should start eating healthier food. Maybe you should just anything that we would move them to be healthier, they're going to say no to. Another type is a controller. And that's a person who doesn't respect other people's boundaries. A person who, and their motivation usually is again, it's similar. It's fear. It's fear of not being loved or accepted or getting what they need. But instead of responding by, overworking themselves, they are expecting more of others to fill that gap for them. And so they're going to run over your boundaries that you set up if you let them to get what they want. And then the last kind of group that they share about is the non-responsives. And those are people who don't hear the needs of others. They're the ones who their boundary is that when they should say yes or they should consider other people, they're going to say no because they've walled themselves off once again. So,
and so it's helpful for us to be able to identify where we fall on that list and also where others fall on that list. And so, once we do that, how do we start setting those boundaries?
Yeah, I know for us, it starts with talking about it, recognizing that, hey, we need to evaluate where we're at in this whole discussion. We need to evaluate maybe before we get to a crisis, like how am I doing on my boundaries? Am I saying yes to the right things? Am I saying no to the right things? If not, why? Have family discussions about it. That's something I think has been really useful in our household, is like, even when people don't want to, and we have to drag them kicking and screaming a little bit, we got to sit down and talk about what's going on in our heart, what's going on in our life. And so we try to create regular times where we can sit down and evaluate, and that comes down to, what are you committed to? What are your responsibilities? What are you prioritizing? How are your relationships? How's your emotions? How's your spiritual development? You just kind of go through those list of possible parts of our life and figure out, if you have problem areas, then what's the boundary issue that you're dealing with there?
Yeah.
And once we do that, we need to recognize, why, if you do have a boundary problem, what's motivating that? Because it's a lot easier for us to make a change if we see why, rather than just because I'm supposed to. And so, but that takes time to unpack that. One of the ways we've helped unpack at our house is we think through, okay, you're making this decision or you're exhibiting this action. What's the long-term outcome of that? Mm-hmm. And so we begin laying out, what's going to happen if we keep doing this. If I keep having, 12 hours of work in a 10-hour day, what's going to happen? Well, eventually I'm going to have so much work piled up that I'm gonna be crushed under the weight of that. So I've got to make a change right now for the health of the future. So we do a lot of that. Yeah.
And you mentioned work, but what are maybe some other specific areas, especially for you as a parent, as you are trying to help your kids develop those boundaries? What are maybe some specific areas where you see that you've really had to step in and help them develop those boundaries?
Yeah, I think relationships within my household and outside my household have probably been the primary place that we've talked about boundaries. So in our household, some of the things we talk about is respecting others, using kind words. This week we've been talking in our morning devotions. We read the Bible and ask some questions, and everybody has to answer. And my youngest Josie this week, every day, just about when I've asked the question, she gives me the same action step. She's like, "I need to yell less and think before I speak." That's her. I was like, that's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's healthy. That's
Yeah.
she's recognizing that that she, because she feels bad, she tends to be that run over other people's boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what. But she's recognized that, and she's trying to adjust that. So that's been really healthy. And then, but then the other side of that is, and these usually are more the outside of the house relationships for our kids. Just talking them through when they've been hurt.
Yeah.
When people are non-responsive to them, when people are controlling to them, when people avoid them, just talking through, well, what do you think they're thinking? What and then say, but you don't have to respond to an unhealthy action. So if someone's unhealthily, treating you and putting an unhealthy expectation on you, then you simply need to say, this is what I'm willing to do.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to yell or you should think before you speak, but just say simply, I care about you, but I can no longer let this happen for myself and for your own good too.
Yeah.
And try and help them think through those things.
And in your experience, do you feel like, once boundaries are set, that those never change, or do those adapt and change as we get older, or as maybe our life situations change?
I see. So this is not a one-time action. Like even just kind of fun example. Like so I got this little hobby farm, and one of the great things, I bought it and already had all these cross fences on and everything. But you know what? I'm always fixing fence. I'm always having to put new posts in. I mean, there's always maintenance. No matter how good of a boundary you have, there's always maintenance to be done. And so the same way in our relationships, our spiritual life, our emotions, that's something we have to always keep coming back to and evaluating. We need to always be checking our fences.
Yeah.
that's
good.
That's a part of what we have to do. And they're going to change over time. We grow, the people around us grow. We're in different relationships. We're at different places spiritually. Yeah. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, to get figured out. Is because, yes, Christ does call us to lay down our lives for other people. He calls us to make sacrifices. He calls us to give up our rights. But he doesn't call for us to do things that are unhealthy, that are damaging to us and damage to other relationships. It's not healthy for me to let someone run over my boundaries.
Yeah.
Jesus always showed up when he meant to show up, not when other people expected him to show up. He always gave people what he knew they needed, not necessarily what they wanted. Yeah. And so we have to learn the difference between those things, and that takes a lifetime, I believe.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know even, for me personally, I know that there are, whether, relationships with specific people, that those boundaries have adapted over time based on where they're at in their life, or where I'm at in my life, or, maybe what once was an appropriate boundary isn't an appropriate boundary anymore.
A boundary is not to shut people out.
Yeah.
A boundary is to develop healthy relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up, any last thoughts?
Well, it's kind of like a lot of what we were just saying. Boundaries aren't set overnight, and even when they are, they're going to need consistent attention. So we want you to see this as a habit and a process for yourself and for your children, that you have to continually be working and nuancing to do better all the time.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, as I said, our two takeaways today is, the first is just have a family discussion about boundaries. Yeah. And honestly, that most families probably need that, especially if you have siblings.
Yes.
You may have already had that discussion in one way, shape, or form.
Don't cross this line.
That's right. But I think that's really good, to really maybe unpack that and explain, this is why these boundaries exist, and it's so that you and I both can be healthy and functioning, and So the second thing is to check out Cloud and Townsend's resources, and we'll post links to that stuff in there. Be abnormal.